Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to another tier list here on the story mode. This week, we are talking about Pixar movies with the recently released Lightyear from Pixar. I saw that the other day, and I wanted to talk about Pixar movies, so we're going to be ranking every single Pixar film. But before we do so, please hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel. Also, comment below and let me know what you thought of Lightyear specifically, but also how you'd rank the Pixar movies as well. So let's bring the tier list in here. We've got all of the tiers up here. And again, I do quotes with my letters. So we got S through F, but also a quote that's kind of aptly applied to each tier, all the way from I'm the greatest good you're ever going to get, from The Incredibles, all the way to You're a sad, strange little movie, and you have my pity. So now let us begin. So we're going in release order. So we're starting with Toy Story. Also, another stipulation, I always only do 5 at the absolute most for my S tier. It doesn't have to be 5, but 5 is the absolute most. Let us begin with Toy Story. Toy Story is a fundamental movie for so many of us. It's a foundational piece of my childhood. I love this movie. It is fantastic. I feel like most people know where this is going. It's hard to not put it in S tier, but it feels weird putting it in S tier right off the bat. Oops, that was a mistake. Definitely not F. It's going in S. I'm the greatest good you're ever going to get. Toy Story is one of the best movies Pixar's ever made, and it continues to be the gold standard, really, for what they do and what they can try to achieve. So I think most of us can all agree about that. Sure, the CG hasn't completely aged perfectly. It is almost 30 years old now. I can't believe it. But yeah, almost 30 years old. Toy Story is still one of the best movies Pixar's ever made. A Bug's Life. A Bug's Life is one that's often forgotten, as there's never been a sequel to it. There's no real continuation of the story. There were also other movies created with a similar type of story at the same time. We're looking at ants as well. So Bug's Life, I feel like, gets lost in the shuffle. Now, I was a late 90s kid, early 2000s kid, and Bug's Life was one of my favorite movies growing up. I really, really like Bug's Life. I think it's a really good movie, and one that hits a lot of the best aspects of Pixar. It is a bit forgettable. The CG in Bug's Life, I would say, has maybe aged even worse than Toy Story. So it doesn't look the best now today. Disney's also removed it from the theme parks. It was in California Adventure. We had a Bug's Land, which was very cool, but definitely designed for kids about 10 and under. It's hard to rank Bug's Life because I haven't gone back to it as much as I've gotten older. It's not really, I would say, one of my favorites anymore, but as a kid, I watched on repeat over and over and over again. And oh man, and it's also subjective to Pixar and the quality of films they've made. They've made so many really, really good ones that it's hard to, like, a C for Pixar or a D for Pixar is not really a C or D on most other lists. But I can't put Bug's Life in one of those. I think I'm going to put it in at least B for now. B is where I think I see Bug's Life. I just love this movie as a kid. So I've rewatched it like once in the last 5 or 6 years, and I did still really like it. So I still want to put Bug's Life at the top of this list, or the top half of this list, I should say. Toy Story 2, the often underappreciated sequel to Toy Story, because Toy Story 3 was so magnificent, nominated for Best Picture. Toy Story 2 was supposed to be a direct DVD, or no, back in the day, direct to VHS release. And it ended up getting theatrical because it was so good. And it is fantastic. It's such a great movie. I rewatched this one a couple of years ago before Toy Story 4. Again, still holds up. The visuals are a little dated like Toy Story, but a slightly better. This is where it gets tough because I love this movie too, and it would be an S in a heartbeat, but I want to see what else is on here. I haven't really planned this before, so I think I'm going to put in an A for now. And if I know, because I know at least 3 other S tiers for me, it might jump up and be that 5th S tier. Monsters Inc., another one that I grew up with. Absolutely love this movie. It is very funny, but it also has a lot of heart. I feel like Monsters Inc., out of a lot of the early ones, like, everybody still talks about Toy Story. Everybody still talks about Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Cars, even Wall-E, Up. Those seem to get a bit more talk than I feel like Monsters Inc. really does. Monsters Inc. is one of my favorites, and it has some of the best voice acting in all of Pixar films. Also, just I could quote so many lines from this one. This one was also on repeat when I was a kid. I'm gonna give this one an A as well for now, and I think I do like Toy Story 2 a little bit better than Monsters Inc., but it's very close. And I feel like the upper echelon of Pixar, really the early years of Pixar, everything that came out from like 95 all the way to 2010, they're all so good. They're all so close together that it's so hard to actually like rank them in the tiers themselves, but I'm going to put Monsters Inc. at A. Finding Nemo is another. Actually, Finding Nemo has never been amongst my top five or top six, seven. I know a lot of people absolutely love this film, and I do too. It's definitely in my top 10, but it's for me, it's in the lower end of the top 10. I've never thought it was the absolute masterpiece, but the character work here is fantastic. The animation at the time was incredible and never seen anything like it. So many iconic lines, so many great moments. I'm still going to put this one in A. It's a great movie. Incredibles. So Incredibles is the best Fantastic Four movie we've ever gotten, with mixed with a little bit of Watchmen for kids. But I know that comparison's been made so many times, and a lot of people want Brad Bird to direct a Fantastic Four movie. But it really is. It captures that heart, the family heart, the familial heart of Fantastic Four. It's stuff that the comics have done so well for so long, and it translates that. And I think it goes beyond a lot of comic cliches and into a lot of original territory by focusing on the people. And I think especially back when this film came out, we'd never really seen superhero movies like that or comic book movies like that. This is not a comic book movie because it's not based on a comic book, but superhero movies in general, we had never really seen anything like that when it came out. And for it to be an animated action superhero movie, it transcended so many genres, and it was so good, so much better than any of us could have really anticipated. I'm going to put it in S tier. I think it's right behind Toy Story for me. I love this film, and it continues to get better with age. Edna Mode, everything about it. I love Syndrome, all the whole family, Parr family, everything about it is so great. I love The Incredibles. That's definitely S tier. Cars is definitely looked on as the black sheep of the original Pixar run from 95 to 2010. It's the one that sticks out the most as the most average movie, I would say. I still think it's a really good movie, but compared to everything else they made in that 15-year stretch, it's not as good as any of those other movies. I would say as a Pixar movie as well, it's one that has a lot of heart, but it doesn't have the emotional moments. It doesn't have the sometimes tragic moments a lot of other Pixar movies have. It doesn't have the moments that make you really think. It is more straightforward than most Pixar movies. And for that, I think I'm going to put it at the top of C. I think it's right going to be right there as my first entry into my C tier. Ratatouille was one that I didn't really watch that much as a kid. I saw it a couple times when I was younger, and then I kind of fell off of it, and I didn't go back to it very much until recently. And I went back to it again, and I was really struck by not just the story of this film, which is really good, or the visuals, the way it portrays everything, the way it portrays food, and the way it portrays Paris, and all of that stuff. It's also just got so much heart. It's such a great film and full of soul, full of heart, full of passion. And I think a lot of the best Pixar movies really touch on our passions and the way we look at the world and the way what makes people people. And I think Ratatouille gets that as well as basically any Pixar film that's ever done it. It's hard. It's very close for me with Finding Nemo. I think I like Monsters Inc. and Toy Story 2 a little bit better, but I think I'm going to put it right behind Finding Nemo right now. It's fantastic though. It's so good. And if you haven't seen Ratatouille in a long time, watch it because I think you'll you'll appreciate it a lot more. Wally was one that I remember seeing in theaters when everybody was like leaving the movie. They were all like, "Oh man, that was boring. There was no talking." And I remember even as a kid being like, "What?" I loved Wally, and maybe it's the science fiction fan in me. Maybe it's the fact that I've always loved space and sci-fi. But Wally has always touched a nerve for me that I not too many other Pixar movies ever have. I think it's one of the greatest films, animated films of all time, and it's one of the best films they've ever made. Right now, it is at the top of my S tier. It is fantastic. And if you're one of those people that think it's boring and you haven't seen it since 2008, Go rewatch it. I love Wally. Up. I remember seeing Up in theaters as well, but also towards the end of when you reach that transitional period in your life when you're a kid and you're very much so still doing kid things, but you're starting to transition to I want to see, more adult movies. I want to see PG-13 movies. I want to see, comedies that are maybe a slightly inappropriate, stuff like that. The pressure around you, the people around you and at school, and there's all this, all these people starting to do more grown-up things or watch more grown-up things. And I remember that being kind of in that transitional period in my life where I was kind of wanting to do the same and follow everybody. But I still ended up seeing Up with my family, and I couldn't believe how good it was. It blew my mind. I remember just sitting after thinking about it and how moving it was, how emotionally relevant it is, and not just the beginning. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, well, Up is just the first 15 minutes, and then after that, it's just good." No, I think this whole movie is an absolute masterpiece. I don't know if this will spoil something for other future lists I might do, but it's my favorite animated movie I've ever seen. I love Up. It is so good. It's in probably my top 10 favorite movies ever. And just everything about it strikes me every time I watch it, and I watch it a lot. So Up is my favorite Pixar movie, and it's my favorite animated film ever. So there you go. Up in the S tier. So see, we already have 4 in S tier, and that's why I feel so bad for Toy Story 2 and Monsters Inc. really, because both of those should be up there. But the last one I'm actually going to put in my S tier is Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3 was another movie, and it came back, and like I said, with Wally, Up, and Toy Story 3, those 3 came out in consecutive years, 2008, 2009, 2010. I feel like Wally captured that a bit more grown up side of me, when you're starting, like I said, transition into more adult entertainment, where you're starting to watch things and understand the themes that are presented in front of you. It's not just animated fun, it's now got layers to it. Wally got that, and I was able to look at it as a film beyond just, a movie made for kids. And then Up, that the exact same thing, but on a more human level. Toy Story 3 then captured that end of that transition period where you're like not really playing with toys as much anymore. You're not really doing any of that stuff, and it's starting to hit on what you don't even realize is nostalgia back when you're young. Like I think it was 12 when I saw Toy Story 3, and it's kind of right as you're rounding out that age to where you're starting to move beyond a lot of that. You're entering middle school. You're moving beyond a lot of that, and you're not. I wasn't as old as Andy in this movie, but like it's a similar thing to where you start to get a nostalgic feel for everything around you. And Toy Story 3 just hit me so hard. I remember when I saw it, and also saw it in the theaters with some younger cousins who were still living with their childhood, and me starting to transition beyond that. And I just thought it was absolutely beautiful. It's actually my favorite Toy Story movie, and I feel like not a lot of people have that opinion. And I feel like Toy Story is very much so, and Pixar in general, very much so hinged on how old you were when you first saw these movies. And so it's going to be interesting to see where children today who have seen some of these newer Pixar movies in the last 5 years that may not rank as high for me because I wasn't young when I saw it, but they might rank them in the top 10, because to me there's like a top 10 that's absolutely perfect. And like it's so hard to beat anything in that top 10, and very rarely do I see a Pixar movie that actually cracks it or gets close. And I think for these 5, I don't see any movies that they could possibly make getting into that 5. So Toy Story 3 is in that S tier. Cars 2. I actually think Cars 2 is a lot better than people give it credit for, but it's similar to Cars 1 in the fact that it is such a significant step down from pretty much anything Pixar had ever made coming in 2011, especially coming off of Wall-E, Up, and Toy Story 3. Then you got Cars 2, and it's such so much less full of emotion, so much less full of heart. It is more of an action figure movie. It's more of a let's appeal to kids movie, and Pixar hadn't done that too often. And you can argue Cars was the only film that had ever actually done it, but every time I go back to it, it's very meh. And I think in a Pixar list, unfortunately, even though it's better than a lot of animated movies, I'm still going to put it in F, because to me it is probably the weakest Pixar film I've seen, just in terms of all the things that they can bring to the table. It doesn't really do any of those things besides world class animation. So now we move on to Brave. And Brave was actually one of the only Pixar movies I missed in theaters. I think after Cars 2 and then starting to Brave just looked too traditional. And I think that is still my complaint, even though I've watched it recently and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to because I always heard Brave was on the lower end of Pixar tier. And I think it is still, but it's still an enjoyable movie. It's a really solid Disney style movie. It's not really Pixar-y. I think that's what holds it back, and that's what makes a lot of people forget it's even Pixar. It's not necessarily a bad thing because there's a lot of great Disney films, but it does pull back a little bit on a lot of the Pixar style stuff. And I know they were trying to do something different. The animation is still great in here, solid cast of characters, but it's tough to really rank it somewhere. I feel like I'm gonna put it in C because I still like it. I think it's still solid, but I don't think it's one of their best films. And I think Cars is a bit more creative as well. Monsters University is one I haven't seen in a while, actually. So I remember it surprising me that it was better than I thought it was going to be, but at the same time, it is still a spin-off and still not even close to as good as Monsters Inc. So in that sense, it kind of falls a little bit flat. I do want to rewatch this one, but I think for now I'm pretty comfortable putting it in C because it is to me the middle tier of Pixar. It's not I can't put it in that upper half. Inside Out. It was the most creative film they had made probably since Up back when Inside Out came out. Inside Out was back to Pixar really trying to innovate and come up with creative new ideas to explore people and humanity and what makes us us as well as appealing towards children. And I thought Inside Out works really well. It's to me not quite on the level of a lot of these movies up in A, but I think it's still got a lot of heart and a lot of emotion. And I really, really like this. I'm having a hard time not putting it in A because I think it's a lot better than Bug's Life, but I don't think it's quite as good as any of these things in A. I think I'm going to put it at the top of B right now. I might move it up to A depending on how the rest of this list goes. The Good Dinosaur. I think The Good Dinosaur, similar to A Bug's Life, is very much so forgotten because it came out in 2015 when Inside Out came out and just kind of came out with no fanfare. They just put it out. And I think the story is very simple, and that's why people don't really gravitate towards it. It's another dinosaur movie, which we've had quite a few animated dinosaur movies in the past. So in terms of visuals and stuff like that, it doesn't really stick out. But I remember the visuals themselves, the animation itself is absolutely gorgeous. That is definitely the highlight. I think The Good Dinosaur tells a good story, an emotional story, one that still resonates, but it's also a story we've seen before. I think amongst Pixar movies, it's hard to place it because I do think it's underrated, but it's also just very simple. I'm really torn between bottom of C and top of D. I feel like I'll put it in D right now because there's nothing else in there. But I don't think it is a huge step down from something like Brave. I think it's right around there. I think it's just a bit more forgettable. And so I'll put it in D for that. Finding Dory, I think, is actually a really good sequel. I feel like people enjoyed this movie more when it came out than they do now. There's more criticism towards it now than back in 2016 when this came out. I remember seeing it with my whole family and really enjoying it and liking a lot of what they did here. It is a bit redundant in parts, and other parts aren't quite as memorable, especially when piggybacking off of Finding Nemo. But I think they nailed a lot of aspects. I remember it still being quite funny, especially because Dory is the more comedic side character. It's close with Cars. I think I'll actually drop it to C, maybe right in front of Cars. I don't know. It's very close between Cars and Finding Dory. Cars 3 is another one. I think like Cars 2 goes more action heavy. It tries to be different at least. Cars 3 kind of is very simple and redundant. Besides this awesome poster that I think all of us were really kind of shocked by their initial marketing campaign, which looked really cool. The movie just is flat. It doesn't feel like it's got much heart. It focuses on things that I feel like none of us really care about. Even like I think even kids who grew up as big Cars fans, there's not that much in 3 that's really different or redeeming, or really it doesn't focus on the things we want it to focus on. I think I'm gonna put this one in F. It's the only other Pixar movie besides Cars 2 that I feel like I don't really ever see myself watching that again. Coco is really good, very creative, quite a unique movie. I enjoy a lot of what Coco does with both music, themes of family, themes of remembrance, all of that stuff. It's really well done, and the visuals in here are absolutely fantastic. I'm not 100% sure. I think I'm gonna put it at B right behind Inside Out. I think I like the emotional stuff in Inside Out a bit more. I think I find it a bit more creative, where obviously this is more about people, but I do love the Day of the Dead stuff and all of that. And Incredibles 2, which actually, similar to Finding Dory, was appreciated more when it came out and then has since been dropped in terms of people's perception of it. I think Incredibles 2 is still a really good sequel. I think it's one of the best sequels not called Toy Story that's ever come out from Pixar. I enjoy it a lot. I think it's action packed. It's got the heart still, maybe not as much as the first one, but it's hard to really, make a sequel that is super different from the superhero formula, especially like the jump between 2005 when we see or 2004 when we see The Incredibles all the way to 2018 when Incredibles 2 came out. The amount of superhero movies that came out in those years made Incredibles 2 very difficult to do something really different, like in first Incredibles had done. So I think in that sense, the story is a bit more bland, but at the same time, the visuals, the action, all of it is really great here. I'm gonna put it in B actually. I think it's a really good sequel, and I like this movie a lot. I've seen it a few times. And I think Incredibles, I would be up for an Incredibles 3 if they ever wanted to do that. Toy Story 4. I'll come off right off the bat and say Toy Story 4 is my least favorite of the four Toy Stories, but it hit a different angle that I really did not expect. And I thought the message it was going for, the themes it was going for, were still super strong and super prevalent, and worked, especially for us people or us kids who grew up with the Toy Story franchise. And it hit, like, its release, Toy Story's releases really hit a lot of the different transition points in my life, with the age that I am. And so Toy Story 4 was definitely a movie that hit on some other things that touched me. But again, I think it always just newer movies, especially when it comes to Pixar, it's just like I said, the top 10 or so that were released in those original 15 years, it's so hard to place yourself inside of that and just for pure nostalgia. So Toy Story 4, I don't think quite gets there, but I'm pretty happy putting it at the top of B. I think it is a really, really, really good movie. Onward. I actually am one of the few people that saw Onward in theaters. I saw it the Friday before the pandemic started. I was both surprised and a little disappointed with Onward. It's kind of, for me, it hits right down the middle. It's got a lot of really, really, really strong emotional moments. I love the things that touch on family dynamics. I love the stuff that touches on the brotherhood as well as the dad, and like all of that really worked for me. I was super emotionally invested in this film. I think the rest of it, the world could have been expanded a bit more. It could have been fleshed out a bit more. There were a lot of cool ideas here. I remember, especially when they were promoting this movie at D23, there were a lot of really cool ideas here that I don't feel like really got played with to their fullest, in terms of fantasy storytelling. Also, at the same time, Onward, its first, or I would say its second act is kind of slow. It gets a little redundant. It follows very, more familiar and typical types of storytelling, quest storytelling. I know that's what it's based on, but like it doesn't do use its world in a unique way enough to really transcend typical quest storylines. And then the ending is fantastic, so it kind of redeems a lot of that. But overall, I think I would say Onward is still for me probably a B tier, maybe right around Bugs Life. It's really tough because I feel like I enjoy Bugs Life more as a whole, but Bugs Life is very nostalgic for me. I think I'll put it right at the end of the B tier. Soul. A lot. This whole list, I've talked about how it's really impossible for Pixar movies, new releases, to crack that top 10. It's really hard for a new release to really touch on things, and leave it to Pete Docter to crack my top 10 actually. And I think I'll put this right at 10. It's mainly the nostalgia factor that carries these 10 above it. But I think in terms of heart, in terms of message, in terms of touching on humanity and what it means to be us, but also finding our passions, finding what we love and letting our passions and what we love define who we are rather than real, physical um rewards or physical manifestations of greatness. We don't really need that as much as internal and spiritual manifestations of greatness and happiness. Soul, I think, especially coming out at the end of 2020, um, was is a beautiful movie. It's absolutely, its message really transcends a lot of the Pixar um, types of storytelling. It really is the most, I think, adult and introspective film they've created in about a decade or more. It kind of does a lot of things that I thought Inside Out was going to do, but I think it does it a little bit better. I love Soul. I think I put it in my top 10, right at the end of A. And really, it might, honestly, on paper, it might be better than some of these other ones, but in the nostalgia factor, I don't think it'll ever pass the other nine for me. But Soul, I think, is an absolutely fantastic movie. One of the best animated movies I've seen in a very long time. Luca, I'm Italian, and I enjoyed Luca quite a bit. I enjoyed the visuals and the characters and the different quirks that everybody had and the embrace of that culture and everything. I appreciated a lot of all that. I thought the storytelling here was a unique twist to classic, fish out of water storylines, to be absolutely literal. But I thought the visuals here were great. I thought it all looked very nice. The characters were solid. I just feel like Luca just, it didn't really hit me completely. Like, it was one that I kind of forget about sometimes, and I think that definitely dings it for me a little bit. But in terms of its message and its storytelling and stuff like that, I think it all works quite well. I think I'm gonna put it in the C tier. It's just a matter of where. It's hard because I feel like even Finding Dory, even though Finding Dory itself doesn't have the nostalgia for me, the characters and stuff has the nostalgia, and same with Cars, but I do think it's a bit more emotionally relevant than Cars. Um, I would put it right in here somewhere, and it's not really the perfect order, but I think Luca would be good there. I think it's a solid movie. Turning Red, I thought, was the most creative film Pixar's done in a very long time. It has heart to it. It has a lot of really unique visuals. I mean, creative in terms of its visual style. Like, it really, Pixar has a very stock look to a lot of their characters, and it's one of the reasons we all love their animation style. And one of the ways they're always able to keep improving it is because they have the looks designed for their characters and the way their characters are shaped, whether it's a fish or a rat or a person or a bug. And Turning Red uh, changes that. It goes in a different style and it's very visually different. I enjoyed quite a bit of that. It definitely takes anime inspirations. It has a lot of different things about it that I actually liked a lot. And this movie really surprised me. I thought, the third act, the kind of the resolutions to everything, it is a bit predictable. But I think everything around the story itself is a traditional mother-daughter trying to understand the people and learning secrets about your family or your past or your parents that you didn't really know, and how that relates to our main character's growth and her adolescence and her becoming who she's going to be. We've seen that before, but this is such a unique spin on it. I actually like this movie a lot. I think for me, it's in my B tier. I'll probably put it right behind Incredibles 2. I think it's a really, really good movie. So that brings us to Lightyear, which is the most recent release, and it's probably one of the reasons a lot of you clicked on this list. Lightyear, I thought it was something I was quite excited for, actually, like surprisingly excited, not just because I love Toy Story, but because I was growing up in that era of Toon Disney that had Buzz Lightyear of Star Command on it, the TV show that I really, really loved. And it was kind of more comedic, goofy, like Toon Disney style, like Rescue Ranger style version of Green Lantern. And I really dug that as a kid who loved DC Comics, as a kid who loved DC animation, and as a kid who loved Green Lantern, mixed that with something else I love, which is Toy Story and Buzz Lightyear. I loved that as a kid, and I was really hoping for this film to be kind of a more modern CG version of that. And it's not. It's more. It's like half an origin story for Buzz, half just like a very generic sci-fi action adventure film. I wish this movie was bigger. It's visually absolutely stunning, and I love the visuals of it. And I'm very disappointed because I saw the box office numbers for Lightyear, and although I don't know if it necessarily deserves more because I don't think it's a great movie, but I feel like it I wanted it to make more because I was hoping we'd get some more like Buzz Lightyear of Star Command style stories with this animation, with these effects, which with all of the grand visuals that are here. I was really hoping for some more fun stories with aliens and all these different things that can happen. I just feel like this movie plays it very safe. It's very simple. It's more grounded. It doesn't really world build. I feel like this franchise, Buzz Lightyear in general, has such a unique world building opportunity. Even if you ride the ride in Disneyland, the Buzz Lightyear Astro Blasters or Space Ranger Spin in Disney World, there's a world building there with Zurg and his evil empire and the Star Command and the Space Rangers, and there's like a really interesting sci-fi concept there that's also expanded in the old TV show that I feel like this didn't hit. And I feel like the worst thing about Lightyear was that I saw it, and like a couple hours after I saw it, I went and was doing something else, and I forgot I saw it. And it was like it was just so simple. It was so safe, and I'm very disappointed that it is so safe and so simple. Um, I'm gonna actually put it in D, and I feel like Good Dinosaur left a bit more of an emotional place on me, like an emotional hold on me. I think at least Good Dinosaur, I remember a lot of the story's emotional beats where, but Lightyear doesn't really have that. It doesn't really have the emotional beats, and it could have had that. But even if it didn't want to do that, if it wanted to go like more actiony, like Incredibles it does, or Incredibles 2, you could have done some crazy sci-fi stuff, and they missed the opportunity to do both. It was kind of caught in the middle. And so I was pretty disappointed with Lightyear. And that's my little review for Lightyear. But let me know down below, though, what you thought of Lightyear. Did it hit for you? Maybe it did. And maybe you saw something in it that I didn't appreciate. And maybe if I watched it a second time, I'd like it a little more. Or did it just kind of fall flat for you and feel too simple, too safe? Let me know down below. Also, let me know what you thought of my rankings and where you would rank the rest of the Pixar films. Let me know all of that down below. If you haven't yet, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more continued tier lists. We'll do a tier list once a week. I also have a video coming out. Phase 5 of the MCU has been a hot topic recently. I have a video kind of trying to predict what they might do with Phase 5. What are some of the movies that will be coming out and some of the properties in Marvel Comics that they haven't yet touched on that I'm very excited to talk about. So stay tuned for that video later in the week. If you haven't followed Star Wars Lads, that is the Star Wars channel that I'm on, and we review all things Star Wars. We are going to be covering Shadow of the Sith when it comes out, that novel, but we'll also be covering Obi-Wan Kenobi Episode 6. You're going to want to check out our review of that, as well as some discussions about possible future stories with Obi-Wan Kenobi. Check all of those videos out on Star Wars Lads. You won't be disappointed. I post a lot of stuff there on that channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.